top table to introduce themselves.
Good morning, I'm Karina Haskins from Democratic Services.
Good morning, I'm Christopher Griggs-Trevarthen. I'm Team Manager of the Development Management Team.
Good morning, I'm David Brown. I'm one of the Council's Planning and Highway Solicitors.
Thank you. Please can I remind everyone to switch their phones, iPads, laptops to silent during the meeting. The meeting is being filmed and the recording will be available on the Council's website. Anybody speaking that does not wish to be filmed should make themselves known to the camera operator. I now ask the Democratic Services Officer to read out the emergency evacuation procedure.
Thank you, Chair. If the continuous alarm sounds, you must evacuate the building by one of the designated exits and proceed to the named assembly point. From this room, you use the main door and then the main exit of the building, and the assembly point is in Orange Grove on the green outside Browns. Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies for absence and substitutions. Do we have any?
Councillor Paul Crossley has indicated he will be late, so apologies if he doesn't arrive.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Councillor Hodge? Sorry, could you put your microphone?
Yes, the last application relates to a tree on my property, so I'll be going out of the meeting.
Yes, and I have to declare an interest in, it's probably an other interest rather than a disclosable pecuniary interest in that tree. I can probably see it from my study. I can certainly see trees at the end of the road, which probably belong to Lucy's property.
Thank you very much. Right, urgent business agreed by the Chair. I don't have any such urgent business. We now move on to items from the public, statements and questions, and the Democratic Services Officer will now inform you of the public speaking procedure.
Thank you, Chair. The speakers will be called to speak immediately after the case officer has made their presentation. The order of speakers and the time allowed for speaking will be as followed. First, if there's any parish town council representatives, they speak first and will be allowed 3 minutes. Objectors to an application are next and they will be allowed 3 minutes. Supporters of an application will also be allowed 3 minutes. And ward councillors who are not on the committee but have indicated they wish to speak may do so for a maximum of 5 minutes. Speeches will be timed by the traffic light system you can see on the table next to me. At the start, the light will be green and will turn to amber when there is 1 minute of speaking time remaining. When the light turns red, speakers are asked to conclude their remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, minutes of the last meeting, they've been circulated. Are these approved as a correct record? Councillor Jackson.
I'll move that they're a correct record, Chair.
Thank you. And do we have a seconder? Yes, Councillor Warren.
Yeah, happy second. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We did go on a site visit before the meeting to 1 Drake Avenue, Coombe Down, but that application has been withdrawn for this meeting and is likely to come back in a future meeting. So we move straight on now to the main plans list, and the first item is 23/02958/VAR, Waterworks Cottage, Fairfield Park in Bath. And just to start with, as this was on the agenda at our last meeting, and it's minuted, invite the lead planning officer to just explain why the items come back to committee today.
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, as you pointed out, this application was heard at the last meeting, and members did resolve to refuse planning permission. However, during the course of the debate, there was a query about members' ability to apply a condition to restrict permitted development rights for further extension and outbuildings. Upon review of the answers given, we're not satisfied that the advice that was given was entirely clear to members. and it would have been open to the committee to defer the item for officers to further consider the request by committee and come back with clearer advice. So to avoid any potential accusation that officers have misdirected members in their advice, we've decided in the interest of fairness to bring the application back this month. So you will have to make a fresh decision on the application today. But if there's any queries about those permitted development right questions, we can answer those during the question section of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to emphasise that we make a fresh start with this application and deal with it fully, as everyone would expect. So we now move on to the planning officer to present the report. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Given members' familiarity with this site, I'll keep it fairly brief this morning, but just going to run through the site itself and the specifics of this application and what it relates to. So the application concerns Waterworks Cottage, which is located in the Tralcombe Way street in the north of Lambridge Ward. You can see the site highlighted in red on the site location plan before us, and an aerial image of the site. The site is large and sort of triangular in shape and is located directly adjacent to the Greenbelt and AONB boundary. These are some images of Waterworks Cottage, which is the existing dwelling on the site, as well as the gardens of the property and the access to the property. By way of background, the Planning Committee granted planning permission for development of 2 detached dwellings on the site on the 26th of July of this year. And the current application now seeks to vary a total of 3 conditions attached to that planning permission. The conditions which are sought to be varied are condition number 5, and this condition relates to cycle parking at the approved dwellings. The original wording of these conditions required details of cycle parking to be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority prior to occupation of the dwellings. However, the cycle parking proposals are shown on the approved plans, and therefore it's proposed to vary this condition so that the cycle parking would be implemented in accordance with the details shown on the approved plans, rather than requiring any further submission to the local planning authority. The second condition that's proposed to be varied relates to the landscaping scheme condition. That's condition number 7 of the planning permission. The original drafting of this condition required that the landscaping scheme was implemented prior to the occupation of the homes. However, the applicant has raised a concern that the homes might be completed outside of the planting season for certain plants that are included within the landscaping scheme. And therefore, the condition would have the effect of preventing occupation of the homes until the landscaping scheme was completed. Therefore, it's proposed to vary this condition to allow completion of the landscaping scheme either prior to occupation of the dwellings or in accordance with a programme of implementation agreed by the local planning authority. So that would allow the landscaping to be completed either prior to occupation of the homes or in accordance with an appropriate timescale in respect of the seasonal issues around planting. And that would avoid the need for the homes to remain empty if it was not the correct planting season following completion of development. The final condition that's proposed to be varied is condition number 15 of the permission. That condition relates to the approved plans list, the plans and drawings list, and it's proposed to vary this condition to allow substitution of some drawings that were previously approved with revised drawings. And those changes are required because the applicant wishes to make changes to the size and design of the house on plot number 2, located to the east of the site. The changes themselves, externally, the building would be increased in scale by 75 centimetres in depth to the south of the building and 80 centimetres in depth to the east of the building. These changes would increase the floor area of the dwelling approved on plot number 2 by a total of 24 square metres. This enlargement would create a larger kitchen living area at ground level, and it would also allow an additional bedroom at first floor level. So the home that's been given planning permission would be increased in size from a 3-bedroom home to a 4-bedroom home. So now just to run through what those changes in scale of the dwelling would look like on plans. So to the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the approved ground floor plan, and to the right-hand side we have the proposed varied, larger proposed ground floor plan. And it is probably fairly hard to identify, but you can see that the image on the right-hand side of the screen, the layout is slightly larger in terms of being slightly deeper to the south and the east. So that's the bottom of the screen, and the right-hand side, the house has got larger in those areas. Turning to the same situation at first floor level, you can see the same relationship again at first floor level. The layout is slightly larger to the bottom of the screen and to the right-hand side as a result of the increase in scale in those areas. And you can also see on the layout plan that the previously approved master bedroom has been divided in two to accommodate two bedrooms in that area where there was previously one, increasing the capacity of the home from the 3-bedroom home that was previously approved to the 4-bedroom home now sought. Turning to how that would appear externally, on the left-hand side of the screen you can see the approved elevations, and on the right-hand side you can see the proposed elevations. The changes are relatively subtle, but there is an increase in depth and width of the house on the right-hand side of the screen. And this is the same relationship, but in the other elevations. You can see on the right-hand side of the screen that the plans now reflect the larger increased scale of the dwelling that's proposed. So the public consultation on this application, the application was referred to Planning Committee by both ward members for Lambridge Ward. The application received 23 public objections, which I'm sure will be covered in the later speeches by members of the public. But the key concerns that members of the public have raised relate to the loss of the cottage itself. So that's really a principal issue relating to the development. Heritage concerns, the design of the dwelling. People have perceived the increase in scale of plot 2 to be unacceptable in terms of its impact to the appearance and character of the area. There are concerns raised in relation to the garden sizes in terms of the increase in scale that the dwelling would have and the reduction in size of the garden. Highways safety concerns associated with increase in traffic relating to the increased capacity going from a 3-bedroom home to a 4-bedroom home. People have raised concerns in relation to ecological issues, noted that there is no benefits benefits to the community associated with these changes. Concerns have been raised in relation to potential profiteering by the applicant, landscape harm, suggestions of overdevelopment and potential harm to amenity. However, the recommendation that's before members this morning is that the application for variation of those conditions is considered for recommendation to be granted. That concludes the officer's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I now invite statements from public speakers and ward councillors. And first up is Mr. Chris Parking, who is objecting. So if Mr. Parking could come forward and just start when you're ready.
Chairman, members of the committee, I speak on behalf of the local and wider community and as a resident of the immediately neighbouring Coombe House. I wish to uphold our previous objection to the application for variation of conditions applied to the previously permitted scheme and to underline our concerns about the recently disclosed issue of permitted development rights. Size and mass remain significant issues given that most of the objections by members of the local community already consider the mass and scale of the development to be unacceptably large and intrusive. In these circumstances, any increase in the mass of the building, however minor in the opinion of the applicant, should be refused. At the last meeting, the committee saw fit to refuse the proposed variations seeking to increase the size of the dwelling on Plot 2 and to loosen the constraints on the implementation of landscaping mitigation. More recently, however, we have been concerned about the issue of permitted development rights, along with what appears to be a lack of clarity around the rules. Permitted development legislation appears to be very complex, but close reading raises question as to whether the proposed development adheres correctly to the rules, such as the footprint of a replacement building following demolition. As we now understand it, permitted development rights can apply to dwellings old or new, such that the owner may extend it by up to 30% in volume, subject to certain constraints, without the need to seek planning permission. Is that correct? Clearly, in the case of the Waterworks development, where the issue of size and mass of the buildings on this much-debated edge of settlement site has been paramount, then the threat of unfettered expansion by up to 30% through the permitted development route is of considerable concern. In fact, we believe that this issue, which somehow only surfaced at the last meeting, should have been raised at a much earlier stage and be given explicit consideration at the meeting at which permission was granted for the current scheme. Effectively, what has been granted permission, albeit not in the first instance, is the dwellings outlined in the current scheme, plus the potential for up to 30% in volume, very much a material issue when it comes to protection against overdevelopment. So why was this issue not raised at the summer meeting and drawn to the attention of members of this committee by those who have a duty to guide this process, including due consideration of the concerns of neighbours and the wider community? I understand that permitted development rights can be, and often are, removed from new builds. Given the arguments already presented, is there not a clear justification to do so in this case for a very sensitive site? Removal of permitted development rights would not prevent a future owner from seeking planning permission to make alterations, which would then be subject to appropriate scrutiny and controls. I therefore encourage the committee, despite the applicant's ultimatum, to uphold the decision to refuse the proposed variations and to request the removal of permitted development rights, acknowledging the concerns of the inspector in relation to overdevelopment. Perhaps the committee might even have the grounds to reconsider the summer decision to permit the scheme, given that it seems that the committee may not have been properly furnished with all the relevant issues at the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, just going to pause a moment. We've got a technical hitch with our sort of stopwatch here. So I just want to check where we are with that.
Yes, thank you. We've asked the facilities people to come and have a look because the power doesn't seem to be working.
Thank you. We'll press on. Councillor, sorry, not Councillor, Mr. Tom Rock to come forward supporting. Just hold it 1 second. You're okay? Yeah.
Chair, members, good morning. In the interest of brevity, I'll confine my comments to the matter that has resulted in the application being brought back to committee, and I'll not make any further submissions related to the planning merits of the amendments sought. An application under Section 73 of the Act, such as the one before you, seeks planning permission for the same development subject to alternative conditions. When considering this application, members are therefore quite entitled to consider whether, if they're minded to approve it, the effect of the changes sought through the variations to the existing conditions is such that new or additional conditions become necessary and should be imposed. At the last meeting, Councillor Warren pertinently asked whether permitted development rights to extend the property had been removed, because if they hadn't, it could be significantly extended once built and occupied, and that should be balanced against the increase in volume that members are being asked to approve. There is no comparative information available to members to consider this point at the meeting. The comparison between the additional volume sought through this application and what could be added under permitted development rights is set out in your officer's report. My clients did prepare a plan showing the comparative footprint areas, but unfortunately that hasn't been made available to you. Approximately 235 cubic metres could be added under permitted development rights. That compares with 87 cubic metres, which you're being asked to approve through this application for a minor material amendment. Therefore, more than 2.5 times the volume could be added under permitted development rights than my clients are seeking permission for through this application. It's open to you to consider whether, if you grant planning permission for the additional volume sought, a condition should be imposed removing permitted development rights for any further extensions. That's a legitimate consideration, and it's available to you to conclude that such a condition is justified, given the increase in volume that you're being asked to approve. Whilst the applicants concur with the officer's advice that planning permission should be granted without the removal of permitted development rights to extend the dwelling, they have confirmed that they will accept a condition removing those rights if you conclude that it's reasonable and necessary to remove them if you're minded to approve the current application. Therefore, they will forfeit their permitted development rights to extend the dwelling by up to 235 cubic metres if you are minded to approve the current amendment for an additional 87 cubic metres of floor space. Chair members, I commend your officer's recommendation to you, and thank you once again for your time.
Thank you very much. We'll just pause there while we try to sort out this technical problem. Yes, that's a good idea. Yes.
Yes.
We're back.
Yes, we're right.
Chris, Paul, you need to say it again. Yeah.
Thank you. What did you do?
We're back in action. Thank you very much. So thank you for waiting patiently, Councillor Wright. So Councillor Joanna Wright, ward member.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you once again, Chair and Committee, for listening to my concerns regarding... Thank you, Chair and Committee, for listening to my concerns regarding the variance to the planning application at the site of Waterworks Cottage, and my request for this committee to object to this present request by the applicant. I would suggest that this new application continues to be overdevelopment at a site that borders the picturesque edge of Bath, and therefore the proposal would cause harm to the character and the appearance of the area, which overlooks an area of outstanding natural beauty. The harmonious transition between urban Bath and its surroundings would be in conflict with the adopted local policies CP6 of the core strategy and policies D1, D2, D3, D4 and D5 of the adopted placemaking plan. As you are well aware, the Planning Inspectorate previously dismissed an appeal made by this applicant at this site on the grounds that the whole scheme was intensive redevelopment of the site, saying that the site sits on the edge of a settlement that is not well suited to accommodating the quantum development that was proposed. This is an important point. The planning inspector decided that the site on the edge of the city of Bath required a building that sat into the landscape along with the other properties in the local vicinity. Therefore, the applicant went away and did reduce the number of buildings and their size to sit within the planning inspector's recommendations. The applicant then applied again for planning permission on this reduction, and it was permitted by this planning committee. Subsequently to this committee's decision in their favour, the applicant has decided to enlarge Plot 2 and now wants to incorporate an additional bedroom and make this building larger. This, I would argue, is at odds with the original decision made by the planning inspector, who wanted to ensure that the planning's application proposal was a less intensive redevelopment which sits well in the landscape. As I have said previously in other meetings, this application in its various forms has been widely objected to by ward councillors and the local community, and further Chalcombe Parish Council, Bath Preservation Trust, Campaign to Protect Rural England. Even the British archaeological magazine Frog Life and Private Eye have all called into question the many guises of this planning application. It is clear that the residents of Chalcombe Way and Rise and the wider community are against this planning development. The communities feel that they have not been listened to, and what is the purpose of community engagement in this process when every comment that they have made regarding its overdevelopment, loss of amenity, ecological impact and the construction management plan has been overlooked? I now also understand that legally a committee can set permitted development rights onto this planning application. I understand that this means that this committee could agree to this variance and set permitted development conditions that suggests once this building is constructed, there can be no further increase in size on that building. I would ask that the committee does not make this decision. I would ask that the committee refuses this variance and does not set any conditions. The committee has already made a decision in favour of two buildings which are at odds with the views of many across the community. Further, I would like to read to you what I've been asked to say on behalf of residents. Plot 2, according to the current plans for Plot 2, the development cannot extend a new building if it was built after the 5th of March 2016 using permitted development rights. Therefore, permitted development rights do not need to be removed as an extension is not permitted. In terms of Plot 1, the community would like clarification on the legal basis for the approval of plans for Plot 1, which would involve the demolition of the cottage and a replacement house built. The following are conditions for the demolition of buildings using permitted development rights. The footprint of the replacement building must be within the footprint of the old building, and 2, the width and breadth of the replacement building cannot be more than that of the original building. If this is the case, the plans for the replacement building in Plot 1 would have make the demolition of the cottage under permitted development illegal. This would raise the questions. Was the committee aware of this when they approved the current plans? The decision to demolish cottage under permitted development's right would be made by the developer, so it is the developer that takes on the legal responsibility of demolition. What is the legal basis for continuing with current plans? Again, I would ask in terms of this actual application that the committee object. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we're still having some issues with our timekeeping here, but hopefully we can sort that out later on. There were some questions there relating to legal planning matters, but before we move on, Councillor Crossley just arrived a couple of minutes late, and so that Councillor Crossley hears everything pertinent to this application, I'm just going to ask the Chief Planning Officer to explain again why this application has come back to the committee this time.
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, just for your benefit, Councillor Crossley, we did hear this item last month, and committee resolved to refuse planning permission. However, upon review of the debate and the questions, we determined that some of the advice officers given in respect of whether the committee were able to restrict permitted development rights was not as clear as it could have been. At the time, we considered that such a fundamental additional condition we'd need to consider the implications of that, and so it would have been open to committee to defer the application for us to be able to consider that and come back to you with more advice. Now we've brought the application back to ensure that members are not being misdirected in that regard, and you have to consider the application afresh today. You would have heard the speakers for the applicant confirming that they would accept a condition around restriction to the permitted development rights, although that is not part of the officer recommendation. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. There were some comments made in Councillor Wright's address that referred to other matters than we're talking about today. Do we need a response from the sort of legal or planning officers, or shall we just move on?
Yes, I believe you're referring to the comments made about whether the demolition application to demolish, which was an application determined earlier in the year, was permitted development or not. Based on what I heard, I believe there was in that speech there was a misunderstanding of the general permitted development order, and officers are certain that the demolition, the prior approval application for demolition was in accordance with those regulations, and so is not up for challenge or debate today. I think that about covers it, but if there's any other questions, we can pick those up in the debate.
Thank you very much. Right, we now move on to questions to the officer. I think to help focus everybody's mind, if we just take one condition at a time where there's proposed to be a variation and ask any questions relating to that condition so that we're not bouncing about all over the place. So if we just take to start with the first one, if it could just be put on the screen, probably deal with it quite quickly. The one about bicycle storage, can you just put that up, please? Right, any questions from members about that variation? No. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is condition 7, landscaping. Right, okay. I'll take Councillor Hughes first.
Thank you. So I'm just trying to understand what our ecologist makes of this change. Because it seems that the landscaping schedule should be based more around the toad migration season than the occupation of the buildings. So I think the focus may be on the wrong thing.
So there's been no objection from the Council's ecologist to this change. It relates to the landscaping scheme. The landscaping scheme will still be carried out in accordance with the originally approved scheme. It's just the timing that's proposed to be changed. It's either going to be prior to occupation of the houses or in accordance with a programme agreed by the local planning authority. So if they're not going to follow the prior to occupation requirement, another timescale needs to be agreed by the local planning authority. Therefore, officers would have control over that timescale and would ensure that it was implemented within a timely manner that respects the fact that certain plants can only be planted at specific times of year.
Councillor Halson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so condition 7, it's both a trigger condition and compliance. obviously you've covered the trigger regarding prior to occupation or the schedule in terms of planting season. But there's a second point to that condition that hasn't been raised, and that's to do with originally the current condition relates to perpetuity, keeping the landscaping for the lifetime of the development. And obviously the applicant has questioned that, and that's why it's come back. But there's a standard condition that I know the authority used, certainly with larger developments, larger housing schemes, which is the 5-year condition. Could you just expand on the 10-year condition that's been added? Related to the trees, I think it is.
Yeah, I believe that the local planning authority has now actually changed the 5-year requirement to a 10-year requirement in response to the requirements of biodiversity net gain policies. So I think that's why this condition is a 10-year requirement rather than the previous 5-year requirement.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. Councillor Jackson.
I confess I do have a bit of a problem with this area. We have in the past in many applications said 5 years, not 10. But 10 would seem to be reasonable if we are considering whether trees are going to flourish or not or what. And I can see the argument that if the house, for example, was completed in November, this is not the time for planting trees, and it would be unfortunate if the property were empty for a few months until you were at the right season. But what concerns me is enforcement is always a matter of discretion of the authority. And I can think of a number of occasions when the property has been occupied and the landscaping's never been done. So my question to the officer is, what guarantees do we have if this condition is changed that there will be any sort of enforcement to get the landscaping done, which I can see at an appropriate time? But then, of course, there's another issue that the legal officer might like to comment on. At the moment, there is a developer who is going to develop this site, fair enough. But presumably, when it's occupied, ownership changes to the occupant. Would this variation be binding on the person who bought the house as opposed to the developer?
So the way that, so applications under Section 73 are commonly referred to as variations, but what they actually do is they create an additional planning permission subject to different conditions. So the existing planning permission continues to exist, and a new planning permission is created with different conditions. And there are two options, and the developer can choose which of them it wishes to build out. And both run with the land and would therefore benefit anyone purchasing.
And sorry, just come back on the first part of that question in relation to the enforceability of the condition. Officers are satisfied that the local planning authority would have the same ability to enforce, albeit following the trigger period. So that separate time limit, whenever that elapsed, following that time, if the council received a complaint that the landscaping hadn't been undertaken at that point, it could investigate under the same basis as the original condition. So the only change is really to that timing trigger, and we're satisfied that it has the same enforceability as the previous condition.
Questions? Councillor McPhee?
So I'm sorry if I misunderstood it, but if I try and paraphrase what Councillor Wright said, what I heard her say was that if a building is built after 2016, it must be within the footprint of the building that was there.
Yeah, sorry, we're talking about condition,
you
the landscaping. We'll come to that in a moment. Any more questions on landscaping? Councillor Hodge.
Yes, can I just ask the officer, can I be clear that if we accept the variation to condition 7, then after 10 years, then there could be really any change to the landscaping around the properties, including extending the hard standing, that type of change.
So it's accepted that a 10-year period would be a sufficient period for the landscaping that's been approved to establish, following which the householders would be able to make adjustments to the landscaping scheme, providing they complied with any other legislative requirements, such as requirements to give notice for tree felling within conservation areas and that sort of requirement.
Just a further question. So the balance of plants to hard landscaping could be changed after 10 years, and the appearance of the site and...
Yes, yeah. In the same way that any householder can make changes to their property.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. I think that's highlighted a fundamental point. The difference between the two is the original condition is about permanence, whereas it's impermanent in the second wording. Right. Just to check, any more questions about landscaping? Okay. Could we move on to condition 15, please? Right, questions. Councillor Halsall.
Did you want to let Councillor McPhee ask his question before me?
Thank you.
Try and go through it again, but I think you've got the gist. That I believe that what Councillor Wright said was that if somewhere is built after 2016, then whatever is built must be within the footprint, and that would carry on. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't actually understand what this question relates to, sorry.
Well, I think what she was saying was there's, am I correct, there's no permitted development rights if something's built after 2016?
No, these houses would have permitted development rights. There's no conditions on the planning permission that the council granted in July relating to permitted development rights. Okay. So the houses, once completed and once the use commenced, would have permitted development rights.
Okay.
Thank you. So this application before us, we're being asked to consider an increase in plot 2 by 86.96 square metres. There's no reference, however, to plot 1. Were the committee to be minded to grant permission, but with an additional condition to remove permitted development rights, because we've got a one red line boundary surrounding both properties, at the moment we're only talking about plot 2. Has the committee any right to say, okay, if we were to remove permitted development rights on plot 2, can we do the same on plot 1? Because at the moment, if we were to grant this and say we remove PD rights on plot 2, it doesn't stop plot 1 being expanded by 30% at a future time once it's been completed and occupied.
So I think it would be down to the committee to specify within a condition that was appropriately worded as to which property within the development they were removing permitted development rights from and the reasons why they were doing that. The committee would have to be very clear as to what the reasons were, but providing the committee did see justification for removing permitted development rights, that case could be applied to either of the properties, providing the condition was clear as to specifying in its wording which property it relates to or if it relates to both.
Councillor Soane.
Thank you. Yes, I wasn't here before, so I've got some some more questions. Firstly, the 235 cubic metres referred to, is those the permitted development rights associated with plot 2 or with the total of the 2 plots? Second, it seemed to me from the plans that the expansion is from 3-bedroom, 5-bed to 4-bedroom, 6-bed. In other words, all we're doing is adding a single bedroom, not a double bedroom, and that has implications for possible generation of traffic. It's more likely to be small children who wouldn't generate an additional car user. Are we being asked to improve the same size of patio, and does that reduce the hard land? Is that an adjustment to the hard landscaping plan? Because if the patio is pushed out by a couple of feet that I think are being extended, we're losing a little bit of garden to that extent.
In answer to the first point, what level of area the buildings could be increased by, unfortunately I don't know the answer to that. I haven't done any calculations myself in that area. You know, what level the buildings can be increased by is quite hypothetical, and I'm not convinced of the relevance to the application before us. But in relation to other points, the bedrooms that are proposed, you can see that on the right-hand side of the proposed floor plan, the bedroom that's being created is a smaller bedroom. It's shown on the layout plan as a single bedroom. Whether or not you could fit a double bed in there is open to the eventual owner of the property. I think furniture is not something that we deal with in the planning process. But it is shown on plans as a smaller bedroom, so it's likely to be a single bedroom. The final point in relation to the size of the patio, you can see it on the proposed plan there. It is slightly larger than it was previously, but again, that is a change that is relatively immaterial to the overall scheme, and is the sort of change that could be undertaken by a householder under permitted development rights on completion of the building.
Councillor Gurley.
Forgive me for asking for some clarification, but going back to the permitted development rights, you said the committee could be minded to reduce permitted development rights on either of the buildings. Is it possible for us to ask for removal of permitted development rights for both of the buildings?
So as previously advised, it is within the committee's gift to draft such condition that related to removal of permitted development rights from both houses, but the committee would need to be very clear on the reasons why it was doing that in order for such a condition to pass the tests for conditions as set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. The condition would need to be justified, and the committee would have to have clear reasons why they were removing permitted development rights from both houses and not just one or the other.
Can I just follow that up? We've heard from different speakers a number of times the question about overdevelopment. So if permitted development rights were removed from either one property or both, overdevelopment is a rather vague term. Would the committee need to, in your opinion, to have much more detailed reasons why it was removing permitted development rights rather than just simply stating overdevelopment?
My view is that the term overdevelopment would be too vague for that condition to be justified. I think we would need to be thinking about sort of specific issues that relate to this particular site. Perhaps its relationship with the Greenbelt and the AOMB located to the north, and the openness that characterises this site, in contrast to the wider neighbourhood to the south. Those sorts of reasons, more specific to this site and why permitted development rights need to be restricted on this site itself, whereas they're not restricted within the wider neighbourhood.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. It's just a very quick question. Obviously, a previous application was refused and dismissed at appeal. So I just want to be sure. Does this provide any conflicts, this request here, with the decisions made by the planning inspector?
So yeah, the planning history does include an application that was refused by the council and then dismissed at appeal. However, I think the key point is the chronology and the fact that since that appeal was dismissed, the council has granted planning permission for development of 2 houses on that site. So we have to take into account the most recent history now that the site does have planning permission, and it's that planning permission that is being sought to be varied. So the earlier history, I would say, is less material to your decision than the more recent decision to grant planning permission on the site.
So I'm just trying. So the application that was subsequently permitted was based on reductions based on the recommendations of a planning inspector. So surely that has some bearing where we've accepted a reduced development based on the planning inspector's report, and now it's looking to increase again. So I'm just trying. For me, I see a bit of a conflict there. But,
I think Chris wants to step in.
Yes. So in terms of the planning history on this one, you're correct. It was the dismissed appeal was a slightly larger building, as is almost like that's put before you today. But in dismissing that appeal, the inspector found that the overall footprint was a large overall footprint on an individual plot of a somewhat restricted basis. So he was making a comparison between the size of the plot and the size of the building. Since that time, the plot size of plot 2 has increased. The basis on which the last planning permission was granted was for an increased plot size of plot 2. It is a different scenario now to what was considered at the appeal. The building is similar in size to what was considered at that appeal, but the plot is larger, so it's less overdeveloped, as we come back to that phrase. That's my understanding anyway.
Any more questions? Councillor Jackson.
I'm sorry, I'm still trying to work out whether the enlargement, which enables them to have an extra bedroom, means that they have got adequate car parking space. We've got the cycle thing nailed down, but I'm not clear, especially as garages no longer count as parking spaces. And looking at that diagram, I would have thought that under permitted development it might be possible to introduce a larger garage.
In terms of car parking, the Highway Authority did briefly comment on the application, and the car parking numbers, I think there's 2 external car parking spaces and the garage, which would include some bike storage, and that's in accordance with our adopted Transport and Development Supplementary Planning document. So yeah, the Highway Authority is satisfied that that's in accordance with our requirements for that scale of building, for both scales of building that have been considered.
I think this is where we have a problem, haven't we? Because
it is a question, please, Councillor Jackson.
Yes, it is. Sorry, I may not have made it clear in my tone and my voice that we've identified a problem. What are we going to do about it? if we take off the permitted development rights and they feel they need a bit more car parking space.
Do you want to come back on that?
I would just say it would be possible for members to specify exactly which permitted development rights they are removing. So you could specify within a condition drafted that you are removing permitted development rights for extensions, but not for changes to hard standing, for example. So you could specify that within a condition.
Thank you, that's helpful. Right, last call for questions. Councillor Hodge.
Sorry, I've just got a question for advice from the officer of what they, if we were to proceed with a condition for removal of permitted development rights, are you able to advise us about how strong the argument might be viewed at appeal?
Well, I'll start with the what the MPPF says about this, which is that planning conditions should not be used to restrict national permitted development rights unless there is a clear justification for doing so. So it's not saying you can't do it, but you do need to give a clear justification. So that will be for the committee to decide what that justification will be. And I think we've had some discussion about that already, about the proximity to the AONB, the openness of the green belt, and concerns about overdevelopment of the plot and the impact on character and appearance that might arise from that. So those are things that could form part of that justification if you so choose to go that way. I'm just going to make a comment as well on some of the debate about whether or not it's possible to restrict permitted development rights for plot 1 as well as plot 2. That is entirely correct, the advice you've been given by officers. However, I would say that in coming up with that justification for doing so, whilst the justification for plot 2 is linked to this proposal for allowing this building to get a little bit larger, there isn't a similar justification that arises for plot 1, which has been granted planning permission as is already. So to restrict permitted development rights on that plot as well, I would fear would potentially be unreasonable and lead us into the grounds of costs if it was to go to appeal. So I would warn against that, but obviously it is a matter for members to determine. I'm not seeking to fetter your discretion in that regard.
Thank you. Right, just before we go to the debate, just one point that I think needs explaining in public, and the Chief Planning Officer can correct me if I get this wrong. The officer recommendation is to permit all these 3 variations. I believe the last variation, if the committee was minded to overturn that because of its significance as it's affecting the plans, the whole planning application falls. However, if we were to accept the officer recommendation relating to condition 15, we could, if we wanted to, actually reject the changes for conditions 5 and or 7. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a very good summary of the position. So yes, you're correct.
Right, let's move to the debate, and obviously at some point we need a motion to take us forward. So let's have Councillor Warren.
Thank you, Chairman. I think my philosophy in life, you are where you are. This has been granted. It can be extended up to 30%, which is why I brought it up at the last meeting. My concerns then were actually you've got probably an 8 or 10% which could be built into it and kind of fit. Alternatively, they could build the house, then slap 30% on a bit any which way but loose after, and it would be a lot worse. So, you know where we are. So I would move the officer's recommendations, however, have an extra condition to remove the permitted development. I'd like to do it on plot 1 and 2. Plot 1's be difficult. Plot 2, A, it's overdevelopment. B, due to the closeness, that's not the correct word, I don't think, to the green belt. So it's harmful to the green belt to be any bigger than it will be with this. I'd like to say the same on plot 1, but I'll leave that open at the moment. If anybody can come in to second it with good ideas for plot 1, I will accept it. Thank you, Chair.
Right, just to be clear, that sounded like a motion, is that right?
It was a motion, yes,
yeah.
thank you.
So do we have a seconder for that motion? If you wanted Councillor Warren to repeat it, please do, if you need clarity. So do we have a seconder? Councillor Jackson.
Thank you. I mean, it's with great reluctance. I think we have to face reality. That was absolutely correct. I voted against this when it came in, but we have this here now. We have what we're looking at, and I think we also have to be reasonable in our demands. So I'm prepared to second it.
Thank you. Right. So we have a motion on the table that's seconded. Councillor Halsall.
Yeah, Chair. Before we vote on that motion, I just want to go through the conditions. Condition 5, I think we probably all unanimously will agree that it's taken as read. It's a compliance condition, and they've showed the cycle parking on there, so there'll be no issues with that. Condition 7, I am still concerned about changing that condition. Whilst 10 years would enable development, the landscaping to embed, and it would be quite a brave thing to do to rip it all out again, but that it would be in the gift of the owner of that property to do so. The whole argument about the principle of this development, one of them, right from the beginning, has been about ecology and about the sensitivity of the setting. So I'm worried about someone coming along in 10 years' time, whatever the latest trend and fashion is in gardening, that they may decide to do something quite fundamental. Now that might be, a good thing, it might work out, but all they need to do is apply for planning permission to change the landscaping, and then we can assess it on those merits. So I would be reluctant to support the change to condition 7, and I would like to keep the original condition. Maybe that, I think, is that something that we need to pass a motion on as well?
Right. I mean, that sounds like an amendment. Can I just check with Councillor Warren? Would you accept that as an added amendment to your motion?
Yes, I would, Chairman. The issue, I think, would be enforcement. However, that's not for us down the line, so I'd be happy to accept that. Right.
Councillor Jackson.
If Councillor Hansel could just repeat what his problem is, because I actually thought the change was a reasonable one.
Could I ask Councillor Hodge to comment on that as well? I think we share the similar view.
Well, yes, I agree with Councillor Halsall's view that the permanence of that condition of 7 is very important.
Right, Councillor Jackson just wanted clarity, really. So can you repeat?
Yeah. So with the 10-year condition, there is the gift the owner of the property will have is that they could fundamentally change the landscaping. They could rip out all the trees, all the vegetation. They could, hypothetically, this is what I think is the important point, they could hypothetically rip everything out and have hard surfaces. That would have a knock-on implication in terms of the ecology and biodiversity of that site. So I am asking for an amendment to say that in the lifetime condition should remain, because all the owner would have to do is apply for permission to change the landscaping, and we can just assess that. A committee can assess that at the time.
Right. Anybody else want to speak? Councillor McPhee and then Councillor Hughes.
I'm not quite sure with the current motion whether plot 1 is in or out.
Plot 1 is out. I'd like to do the same. However, I'm not sure we have the reasons, strong enough planning reasons to do it, if I'm honest with you. So I'm just going to restrict or do away with the permitted development on the proposal is, unless someone comes in with any good ideas, just do away with the unrestricted development, permitted development on plot 2.
Yeah, I think we've had clear advice about the risks of adding conditions to plot 1 when this application is about plot 2. Councillor Hodge.
I have concerns about the motion in front of us tying in the element of removing permitted development from the second property. If that were to go to appeal, then we would have lost all the other conditions.
So just to be clear, the motion is purely about plot 2.
Sorry, plot 2 then. So sorry, to remove the permitted developments on, to go forward with a motion that removes the permitted development rights on
this
on the second plot. If it went to appeal, then all the conditions around landscaping would be lost. So we're going forward with a proposal that I feel makes the things that we hope to retain for the site more at risk.
Sorry, if I may Chair, the applicants have agreed already, as they said earlier, to do away with the permitted development. So it's already been agreed if this goes through.
Councillor Halsall.
Yeah, so I'll let
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Okay, so I just want to make it clear. I mean, I've been involved in every revision of this site and various guises that it's been presented to us in. And my conclusion at every stage has been that this is an overdevelopment. And I have to say that even reassessing it now, I still come to the same conclusion. I think this is an overdevelopment. I think it's mass and scale are an issue. I find some of the design aspects overbearing. And for me, any additions to this are not acceptable. I think it's already exceeded what I would have considered to be acceptable on this. So I won't be supporting the motion. I have to say I agree with the ward councillor and the residents on this. Thank you.
Councillor Simon and then Councillor Halsall.
I've been listening carefully to the debate. There are a number of areas of permitted development which go beyond the question of extension, and some of those permitted developments might not be unacceptable. Councillor Halsall wants to keep the permanent condition about hard landscaping, and I can go along with that, but the point was made that the soft landscaping, the plantings, it's difficult to retain in perpetuity. Developments move on. I'm wondering whether we delegate to permit to allow the officers to settle, A, which bits of permitted development should be withdrawn, some of which might be withdrawn from plot 1 if they affect hard landscaping and other aspects, landscape aspects, and would enable us to ensure that there's no further hard landscaping within permitted development or otherwise. I think there's a bit more work needed to do to get the conditions exactly right, but I read the committee as thinking plot 2 with no further development as on the revised proposal is acceptable. So I might, if people feel more confident about leaving it to officers to sort out details, I might suggest that we delegate to permit.
Can I just check with the Chief Planning Officer? If more discussion with the owner was thought desirable, is it better to delegate to permit, make a decision today, or to bring this back yet one more time?
So I think, although Councillor Warren didn't explicitly say, I think it would have to be a delegate to permit because we would need time to draft those conditions in any case. But my view is, I think officers will need some clarity on which permitted development rights you would like restricted to which property. I don't think it would be sensible, given officers are not recommending any restriction on permitted development rights. It would be difficult for us to then have those conversations about, is it plot 1 or is it plot 2? I think we need the committee steer on that, and you've had my advice about whether to apply them to plot 1 or not. So yes, it would be useful to have some clarity. I think from what I'm picking up from the debate, it sounds like you're looking for permitted development rights over extensions, outbuildings and hard standings, so anything that could affect the extent of soft landscaping within the scheme. That would be open to you to do. You know, I would also comment that although the applicant has confirmed their confirmation around accepting a restriction on extensions, I'm not quite sure whether that's extended to outbuildings and hard standings. And also that confirmation is not binding. There is still an ability to appeal against any condition of a grant of permission. However, when you appeal against a condition on an approval, you do then run the risk that the inspector reconsiders the whole application in front of him and refuses permission. So it's very rare that people do that. Yes, so I think we need we need some clarity around condition 7. I'm not sure whether it was accepted into the motion or not, and whether that was seconded. So there's a few bits of clarity we need still.
Yeah, that's right. I was just going to come to that because there was an amendment to do with the landscaping condition proposed by Councillor Halsall. Councillor Warren said he would take that into his motion, but Councillor Jackson, as seconder, wouldn't. So at the moment, there isn't a seconder to that amendment. So perhaps, Councillor Halsall, if you just repeat your amendment and see if you can get a seconder for that.
Okay. I actually agree with what Councillor Simon has been saying, and I think my concern is not necessarily about the soft landscaping, it's about the loss of soft landscaping, it's the increase in hard landscaping, and I think that could be covered under condition 15 regarding removal of permitted development rights. So I'll withdraw that amendment. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. That simplifies things as well. Right, we're back to the debate. And I think, so we don't lose track, we'll just repeat what the motion is again, and it's been seconded. So would either Councillor Warren or one of the officers like to just repeat what the motion is?
Yeah, Chris, if you want to repeat it, please. You'll get it a bit more technically correct than me.
Well, I'll suggest what I think I've heard you say, and you can confirm whether that's correct. So your motion is to delegate to permit, subject to an additional condition restricting permitted development rights on plot 2 for restricting extensions, outbuildings and hard standings. I believe that's correct. In terms of justifications, I believe you were talking about the justification for that permitted development right removal to be to do with the to prevent overdevelopment of the plot, to preserve the character and appearance of the area and the openness of the adjacent green belt. I think that's correct. I just want to highlight to members, there's a couple of points just of clarity that needs to be raised. Because this application was heard last month and the committee did make a decision at that meeting, in order to satisfy the principle of consistency, we need to now give reasons for coming to a different decision to how we did last time. So just to read out what was resolved last time, I think you have already touched upon these points, so it's not a big thing, but I just want to make sure it's clear and we're not back here again for similar reasons. So last time it was resolved to refuse for the following reasons. Condition 7, landscaping. The amendment would delete the requirement to retain landscaping for the lifetime of the development and would have a detrimental impact on ecology and the rural setting of the development. Condition 15, the plans. The amendment to the plans to increase the footprint to allow for a 4-bedroom rather than a 3-bedroom house would result in overdevelopment of the plot and would be out of character with the area. Now, as I've heard from the debate, I think there is you've started to give reasons for that, but if someone could just address that directly, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Jackson.
I am unhappy about delegate to permit because it's a further deferral of a decision, but it's my understanding that a delegate to permit decision does not require to come back to this committee. That if we delegate, and we're fortunate to have highly qualified and sensitive officers fully capable of making an appropriate decision in the light of the debate that we've had this morning. So I would be very unhappy to see this again. And I, like Councillor Hughes, have been in on every single time that it's come forward. So I think it's make or break now. And I have to also say that in this atmosphere of climate change, when trees can develop horrible viruses and have to be removed at quite short notice, that the condition about perpetual maintenance of the landscaping might very well be considered by an inspector to be unreasonable. I mean, if they planted up with ash trees, they would have to come out now. So that's my feelings on it. But I'm still prepared to second the motion.
Right. We would still need to explain why at the last meeting on landscaping we wanted to keep the perpetuity element in, and today we're not. So we need to, if
given you a reason,
yeah.
Chair. We've got we're more sensitive to climate change and its effect on species.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had more information, and we've also had a considerable clarification of the legal position with the officer's statements. So we're looking at this afresh in the light of fresh information that we did not have when we made the decision before.
Yeah, thank you. Right, Councillor Halsall and then Councillor Hodge.
So, in going against the previous decision regarding Condition 7 of perpetuity, I think, as we've discussed, we can cover that under, we could consider that, based on the motions that are on the table, under Condition 15. So that would be a case of removing permitted development rights for increasing hard surfacing. So I think there is justification to accept Condition 7 on that basis. Just on Condition 15 and the advice we've had regarding Plot 1 and the risks involved in suggesting we should remove permitted development rights on that plot, we've missed the boat on that one. So the question is, given the design of the approved buildings, the question is, how easy would it be to extend those houses anyway, in a manner that would actually comply with the GPDO? So I understand Councillor Hughes's point, but if the motion was overturned and the motion passed to actually refuse permission, then it would still mean that Plot 2 will have its full permitted development rights. So, given the gentleman's agreement from the applicants, and they've said in public that they are, happy to have their PD rights removed, if they are allowed to have this modest increase, then I think we have a compromise there. So when we have the vote, I'll be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Just wait a second. Yeah.
Could Tim just confirm you're happy with that reasoning of why we're making a different decision this time, or different motion?
Yeah, happy with that, thank you.
Right, and just continuing with explaining the difference between decision a month ago, decision today possibly, with Condition 15. We had said before that we were concerned with overdevelopment of a plot out of character with the area. Now, a difference today, as I can see, is that we've had clear advice about permitted development rights. Would that be enough to justify the change in decision?
I think, along with everything else that's been said, and if Tim's happy to accept that.
Yeah, very happy to accept that.
Okay. Councillor Gurley.
Forgive me if I don't understand this, but I'm new to all of this. Let me just quite understand. So I understand about the gentleman's agreement on removing permitted development rights on plot 1. If we didn't, on plot 2, if we didn't remove the permitted development, or if the permitted development rights continue on plot 1, does that, and the building increased by whatever the percentage is, does that head towards the intensification that was originally rejected by the inspector the first time around? I mean, if you got the massive building that, you know, sorry, is that?
No, it's fair enough. It is getting rather confusing. I think obviously the focus of this is around plot 2 because it's plot 2 that's getting larger. Plot 1 will have its permitted development rights intact, and it could be extended in a number of ways. I just want to clarify the percentage, 30% has been thrown around quite a lot. Permitted development rights aren't generally done on a percentage basis anymore. They are done via rules to do with front and rear elevations, distances, heights, materials. There are a lot of caveats, so it's difficult to give a full picture of exactly what could be done in every circumstance. The applicant has provided a hypothetical sort of, they could extend sort of 4 metres southwards on every elevation, which would generally be correct if subject to meeting all the other caveats. We haven't got any information around what could be done with plot 1, but those basic rights, there would, in my judgment, there would be a number of things that could be done, and that would increase the amount of development. But as has sort of already been said, most new properties do have permitted development rights. We need, and national policy says you shouldn't restrict permitted development rights unless there's clear reason to do so. So, as we've heard, members do believe that there is a clear reason for plot 2 in this case.
Councillor Simon.
Yes, I'd like to move an amendment, though, to what Mr. Srivathan said, because he restricted the permitted development rights to plot 2. Now, condition 7 removes the hard landscaping. The change to that removes the hard landscaping change bar in perpetuity on both plots. So it seems to me that we could reasonably withdraw the permitted development right for outbuildings and hard standings on plot 1, which is within the application that we're looking at. But I think we'd find it more difficult to argue the case for removing its extensions. So I would like to say that plot 1 can keep PDRs for extensions, but not for hard landscaping and hard standings and outbuildings.
Right. I mean, that's an understandable point. I'm very nervous about us being judged to behaving unreasonably and going beyond, you know, what is reasonable and ending up with costs awarded against the council. We are just dealing with plot, well, we're focusing on plot 2 today. Councillor Halsall spoke about missing the boat maybe with plot 1. To use a phrase, you know, we can't shut the door after the stable horse has bolted. So I worry about having a decision undermined by bringing in plot 1, but I'll take advice.
But plot 1 loses the ban on changing hard landscaping after 10 years. So the perpetuity ban. So I think we're reasonable in, we're delegating to permit. So we're giving the officers a negotiating brief. I think it would be reasonable to expect that there should be no further hard standings in view of the ecology and climate change and green belt issues. Even if so it moves from effectively the condition 7, keep what you've got, to take away your permitted development rights, because that allows a greater degree of flexibility about, for instance, the plants that are part of the soft landscaping scheme.
Right, I think we're searching for further guidance from the top table.
So, in regard to restricting permitted development rights for Plot 1, as we've said, it is open to members to do that. However, and I've understood the point you've made, Councillor Simon, about restricting sort of loss of hard standing, loss of soft landscaping being to be replaced by hard standing. I mean, that would occur with extensions as well as outbuildings and hard standing. So we obviously also don't have the agreement of the applicant in respect of Plot 1 at this point. So I feel that would definitely be more contentious, and I would be concerned that that reason is not so significant as to potentially still lead us into that territory of being quite unreasonable, given that they can build Plot 1 as is, subject to these conditions currently. And so this is, as the legal officer explained earlier, another permission they would be granting, and they'd be given the options. And because Plot 1 is not changing in any way, other than this change to Condition 7 and the more minor change to Condition 5, I don't think those changes are sufficient to warrant restricting permitted development rights in respect of Plot 1 as well as Plot 2. So my view would remain as before, which is it would potentially be seen as quite unreasonable, and I think we would be increasing the risks of an appeal against the decision and potential for costs. But it is open to members if they want to do that.
Can I just see if there's any seconder to Councillor Simon's proposal?
Actually, Chair, if I may, much as I have a lot of sympathy, I don't think I can accept that anyway.
No, that's fine. No, I understand. But amendment's been moved. I just want to see if there's a seconder for the amendment. If there isn't, you withdraw it. Okay. Right. We do need to, I think, reach a conclusion quite soon. So I'll take a few more general comments. Right, Councillor Jack.
Well, actually, Chair, I was going to suggest that after nearly 90 minutes, we perhaps could come to a decision. But what's niggling me, and the officer might have an answer, are we open to a move by the developer for non-determination if this goes on beyond a certain limited point? I mean, can we set a time limit for the negotiations or what or not? The other general point that I think is quite important, what that map does not show you is what became very clear on the site visit, is the different levels. Plot 1 is sort of on the ridge and is high above Plot 2, which is tucked in, is constrained, and I think the conditions we've been suggesting are appropriate to Plot 2, but not to Plot 1 because of its elevation and wider extent and so on.
Just quickly in answer to your question, I don't know what the target date, decision date on this application is or was. If we're beyond that date, then there is that theoretical risk. But if the committee come to a decision today, and even if that decision is delegate to permit, it would be beyond foolish for them to appeal at that point. So I think that's unlikely.
Right, we're going to move to a vote. Councillor Hodge.
Yes, sorry, I just want to be clear, because at the previous committee meeting, we came to a majority decision that we weren't happy with varying these conditions. I feel that arriving from Councillor Warren's motion that comes forward, in accepting something, a restriction on permitted development rights on property number 2, which the applicants have already said that they will, given an agreement, that they won't undertake permitted development. We're accepting that, and for that we are not accepting, we're agreeing to all the variations. So we're agreeing to all the variations on the basis of something that the applicants have said they won't do. And I feel very strongly about the variation number 7. It doesn't just relate to the land around Site 2. It relates to the whole site, the way the site relates to the environment and the ecology. And I really could not support any variation to condition 7, so I won't be supporting the motion.
Okay, I think we'll go to a vote. So let's be clear. We need to be clear what the motion is. The motion is to accept the officer recommendation to permit, to delegate to permit, and we want to just be clear about permitted development rights. So we're removing permitted development rights on plot 2. Do I need to be more specific than that? Is that okay?
Just that I understand the permitted development rights that the committee want to remove would be those relating to extensions, outbuildings and hard standings.
Yeah. Okay. Right, that's been proposed, it's been seconded. All those in favour, please show. All those against, please show. Okay, that's carried. Right, we're going to have a break now for 5 minutes. Thank you. And invite the case officer, Mr. Ed Alsop, to present the report.
Thank you. So yeah, this is an application for one new house on the site known as Agricultural Buildings on Land on Blackrock Lane in Pueblo. This is the application site here. Sorry, what I should have said is this is an application for, it will replace the existing barn on site. So you can see the outline of that building on the left and an aerial image on the right. So the application site is outside of the housing development boundary and in the green belt. So this comparison of the existing and proposed site plans. Some of the main differences are that the new building will be kind of set further back into the site. There's kind of biodiversity measures and landscaping scheme as well. And the access remains the same as the existing in the corner. So as the officer report notes, the applicant benefits from permission to convert the existing barn into a house. So these are some elevations of that scheme. And as the officer report notes, is that we're kind of essentially comparing what's being put forward now with the applicant's fallback position. So those are the previously approved elevations. And then this is what's proposed. So it kind of maintains the gable design. It is slightly longer and higher, but its width has been kind of significantly reduced. Officers consider that it maintains kind of rural aesthetic with the materials as well. So this is the previously approved floor plan. And this is the proposed. Some of the differences would be that, as previously approved, it was for 5 bedrooms. This is for 4. And also that the floor space is also slightly smaller on the application before you as well, in terms of meters squared. So these are some of the site photos. So that on the left, that's taken from the kind of existing access into the site. And this is the existing barn within the site. And yeah, for the reasons set out in the officer report, we're minded to approve this application.
Thank you very much. Right, we now move on to statements from public speakers. We have one. It's Mr. Jonathan Piper who's supporting. So if Mr. Piper comes forward and start when you're ready.
Firstly, I'd like to thank the committee for your time today. In terms of the personal context of this project, Sinead and I have always wanted to return to a rural part of Baines, which is where Sinead grew up, with the hope of one day building our home. We actually found this plot in June 2022, and we decided to make the choice to sell our home, combine our savings as well as a self-build mortgage, and move into a one-bed annex in order to turn this dream into a reality. During this time, we actually fell pregnant with our now son, Killian, and despite being told that we were crazy to carry on with the project itself, we're actually probably more passionate about it now than ever, on the basis that this is an opportunity to build our forever home in a really nice environment and community for Killian to grow up in. The reason I think it's important to understand the context behind that is we're not property developers. We're looking to build a family home. It's not a short-term plan for us. This is a long-term project to build a high-quality, sustainable home that will replace a building of lower quality that's already approved. We recognise that there has been some objections raised by the Parish Council, and these relate to two parts, one of which is moving the house outside of the development boundary. The context behind that is we chose to do that from a design consideration that was benefiting not only us but also our neighbours as well as the community in the Greenbelt itself, largely on the basis that from a personal perspective it moves the garden away from the road, which would make it safer for our child to play in. But also on the basis that on the previous elevations that have been approved, you saw that there was a large amount of glazing on the south elevation, which actually had direct sight into our neighbour's property through a gap in the existing hedgerow. On the design, we've actually improved that to reduce the number of windows to 3 small windows, 2 of which have frosted glass and none have direct sight into our neighbour's property, due to it now being positioned by a hedgerow that is already there. Baines Ecology actually appraised this as a design enhancement on the basis of relocating the development into a more central part of the plot, actually reduces light spill onto the existing hedge borders, which results in habitat gain. But also it's been credited in the planning officer's report that moving it more centrally in the site actually reduces the current built view from the road as well, which is beneficial for the Greenbelt. Another concern was around the increased height. The previous design that you saw approved via Class Q was much larger than what we needed. So in order to compensate, well, much larger than what we needed, but actually the head height in the upstairs space was restricted, which didn't offer a comfortable living space. So we decided to effectively reduce the overall size of the property to compensate for the increased height, and to be specific, we've reduced that by around 300 square feet. Again, it's been acknowledged by the planning officer that this is of appropriate size and scale for the site and the surroundings, and it doesn't impact neighbours in any way, which I think is reflected on the basis that we didn't have any public objections for the design itself. I guess to summarise all of this, my final comments are that what we're looking to do here is take a scheme that's already been approved via the Class Q that's already in place and significantly improve that. And by that I mean it's going to be of much higher quality design through the use of stone and natural slate, which is in keeping with the local area, but also, more importantly, it's a much more sustainable build. We're looking to incorporate solar, battery storage, higher levels of insulation, a heat pump, as well as electric vehicle charging point as part of that design. So hopefully you can see that we're extremely passionate about this project, but more importantly it's a scheme that is an improvement for our neighbours, the community, ourselves, but also the environment, and that's why I ask you to consider permitting this application today.
Thank you very much. Right. Okay, we move on to questions to the case officer. So who would like to go first? Councillor Jackson.
I wondered if the officer would mind scrolling back. Yeah, that was helpful seeing what it looks like now, but it's the elevations of the roof. I can't quite work out. Is it low? What the difference of height is, and when you're coming up that lane, what are you going to see?
Yeah, so the ridge line, so that the highest part will be 2.5 metres higher than the existing or aka the conversion they can already do. In terms of what it looked like from the road, I don't really have a visual of that, but obviously that was taken into account on the site visit, and you can probably get an idea from the site plan as to what that would be like. But what officers would say is that it's been set further back into and away from that kind of opening that you get by the access at the moment. But we don't have like...
The vital question, I'm sorry I haven't picked this one up from your report. Looking at a barn conversion and that roof there, how realistic would it be to develop the framework in the way that's being consented, or is there any structural problem or
well, I think,
difficulty?
yeah, as part of the previous approval, those considerations are taken into account. So things like, is it capable of doing without a whole new reconstruction? So those kind of considerations would have been passed previously. So yeah, that's previously kind of been found okay.
Councillor Halsall and then Councillor Hughes.
Can I just confirm, so the proposed new dwelling is on a completely different site to where the barn is, so it means that we wouldn't be demolishing the barn in order to build the house. So it's actually going to be to the northwest. And what is the treatment of the land at the moment on the proposed plot? Is it just yard, or is it landscaped?
It's not kind of particularly landscaped. Some of these site photos give you an idea of the situation on the ground.
Just a second question. Are any trees affected by the development? Is there going to be any felling or any...
I don't believe so. I think, yeah, that's all fine.
Okay.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. And could you show us where the housing development boundary is?
No. I'd need to show you kind of like a district map, which isn't in this presentation, but it's not adjoining the housing development boundary. So we accept that it is outside of the housing development boundary, but that's formed part of the kind of planning balance.
So, and how close is it to the housing boundary?
I can't give you that number. It's not close, but yeah, I can't tell you how far away it is in terms of meters. But the fact is that it's outside, essentially. So.
Thanks. I can't remember what my points were when we discussed this before. I think I do remember the application, but my question is this time, and it relates back to the previous debate. If we approve this change and this new one, can we approve it with taking away permitted development rights for future changes?
Chris might want to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you could if you found necessary. But again, you'd be asking yourself the same questions as you did on the last item in terms of whether you feel that is defendable at appeal and kind of costs and etc. So you can, but that's kind of for you to consider.
Councillor Jackson.
Refrain from suggesting a site visit, because I think this site is so remote we might have difficulty finding it. But I wonder if the officer has made any note of how far this dwelling is from the nearest school, which is going to be happily a relevant consideration, I would have thought.
Yeah, no, that hasn't formed part of the decision-making process, partly because, kind of as the officer report notes, is that they already have permission to use this site as a house, basically, as those plans show and as the previous approval shown. So we didn't feel it was necessary to consider where the nearest school was and things like that.
Can I ask a question? I know I've been in email discussion about this, but it perhaps is best heard in public as well. And it's the fundamental policy question of whether obtaining prior approval for a barn conversion should be used as a material consideration for application for a new build in Greenbelt. Now, the Town and Country Planning Order 2015 included the criterion that agricultural building conversion to residential should not include any external projections from the existing structure. And that implies that the existing structure was expected to be retained and should maintain the same dimensions. So I wonder whether you and the planning officer could explain why it would be acceptable in some circumstances to accept a kind of two-stage process to a new build in Greenbelt.
So I think those criterions you mentioned were to do with kind of the previous assessment, whether it can be PD, and obviously that's been passed. So in some sense that we're obviously looking at a new build here, so we do accept that that's what it is. Understand your concerns kind of in relation to two-stage process, but there is kind of case law that says that is okay. And in principle, obviously, you still consider all the material considerations and impacts and things like that. But submitting an application following a prior approval isn't kind of against the rules, or in that sense, it is legitimate, and there's case law to support that.
Do you want to add to that, Chris?
Yes, only to say that I think the correct way to approach any application where there's a claimed fallback position is, well, generally is to start, as you do with all planning applications come before you, consider whether it complies with the development plan in the first instance, and in this instance, officers are clear this doesn't, it's outside the housing development boundary. But then you must also consider other considerations. And a fallback position, as has been established in this case, is a material consideration which you must turn your mind to. What the officer has done is compared, as is the right thing to do with a fallback position, compared the approved scheme versus what is now sought, and has concluded that what is now sought has a number of material benefits that would, in their totality, amount to very special circumstances and to justify this development in the Greenbelt, and also to justify a departure from the development plan in this instance. It's obviously that is a matter of judgment as to whether or not the proposed scheme is better than the approved scheme or comparable, but that's what we're here to debate today, I guess. So hopefully that helps clarify.
Councillor Simon.
Thank you. Could the officer just briefly outline the materials in the previous one, the fallback position, and the materials now proposed, and how they fit? And secondly, from what we were told, this appears to qualify as a self-build properties, self-development. And are there any policies that are relevant to that promote self-build cases?
So the previous materials kind of include render at the lower level, and then kind of a timber boarding at first floor. We would consider, officers consider that the proposed is kind of better in terms of the way it looks. So the proposed will have slate roof. It continues the timber boarding, as you can see on the plans, but it also introduces stone now as well. So in terms of appropriateness, we consider that would overall fit within the kind of local context and maintain its kind of rural aesthetic.
Councillor Holson.
The justification for recommending approval is that is the fallback position as a material consideration, but the new build is on a completely separate site, which means feasibly both buildings could actually occupy the site. What safeguards are in place to ensure that the barn would be removed, you know, following construction of the new dwelling? Is there a time frame for that? Is there a legal agreement in place to ensure that the barn is demolished at a certain interval?
So, same site, but different siting. And I think we have included a condition, suggested a condition that the existing would need to be demolished. I'll double check the wording, but it might be before occupation of the new one or before commencement. I'll just double check.
It's pre-occupation.
Okay, yeah.
Councillor Gurney.
Just a question. I mean, they're talking about how the new design is much better environmentally with solar panels and so on, and Grassels heat pumps and whatever. Was there a reason why that wasn't included in the first design? And also, there is no reason why you shouldn't build the first design. You just prefer the second design, and it's better for the family. I mean, I'm just wondering why it's so big. The first one was so big if that's not necessary.
Yeah, in terms of the kind of construction benefits, in terms of sustainability and biodiversity net gain benefits and ecological enhancements, the fact is that with the previous approval, they don't have to do that, basically. There's no mechanism to control that or enforce that on them, and that's just part of the process. But obviously with this application, all of those benefits will be secured because it's tied to this planning permission. So I think you have to conclude that there's no likelihood that any of those benefits would be coming forward under the previously approved scheme, because there's no requirement for them to provide that. But there would be with this one.
Thank you. I just want to sort of go back to my earlier point, just so that I feel confident in my own mind when I come to vote myself. We heard the personal circumstances of the applicant, and you know, one applauds their determination and ambition, but planning is never about individual circumstances, or rarely about individual circumstances, because this property will should be there in 100 years. So I just want to go back to the general principle, because this house, or proposed house, is outside the housing development boundary. It's in a remote location. It's not near services. It's in green belt. It's not on the same footprint. So you can understand why I'm nervous, because the impression I'm getting is that somebody could look around anywhere in our area, find a derelict barn, buy it, get planning permission to convert it to a dwelling, then demolish the barn, and then they have a new build to their specification in green belt, which would never have been given, never been approved in the first place. So I still would like from the officers to understand why that can't happen generally, and this is okay.
Yeah, so what I'd say in terms of kind of someone kind of finding any old barn and turning it into a house, it's really not that easy. To get that first approval, that kind of stage one, if you want to call it that, there's a lot of tests that they need to meet, and personally I've had those types of applications before and kind of refused them because they don't pass, so it's not a case of any barn will become a house, because there's quite a strict kind of rules and criterions and requirements that it has to meet in the first place to even get that far. So understand, but it's maybe not as kind of prevalent as you might kind of think it is.
And just to add to that, I think as well, it's important each case will be determined on its own merits, and it simply won't be the case that every proposal to replace an agricultural barn where there's a prior approval in place is going to be better. And in this case, I think it's important you calibrate the bar for better should be quite high, because we're going against the development plan, and also there needs to be demonstration of very special circumstances in this case. And as I've said, the officers in this case have recommended that permission is granted, but that may not be the case in other examples which are less preferable to the existing approvals.
Thank you. Right, we'll draw questions to a close in a moment, but I'll take another couple. So, Councillor Jackson, Councillor Hodge.
Oh, sorry, I seem to have my microphone still on. I do beg your pardon. Yes, we've just heard about this ruling in 2015 about a development should be on the same footprint. Now, this is quite clearly not, and therefore it certainly should be considered on its own merits, because it's not the same thing, it's not in the same area, the impact is going to be different, and without wanting to be political, there has been a bit of a lesson this week about the dangers of calling cats dogs. Can the officer explain why this application comes within the same parameters as a consent for a bar conversion, which, from my simplistic reading, is a different animal from a new build house?
So they are two different things. One is a replacement dwelling and one is a conversion. But the point, but you can still make comparisons between two different things and decide whether one is better than the other. The point being is, in simple terms, the conversion can go ahead because they have permission for that. So the question, in very simple terms, and as I've put, there's very special circumstances and reasons, other material considerations to justify something going against the development plan that you need to consider. But in very simple terms, the question to ask is, by comparing the two, which is the preferable scheme almost, So I think that's how you've got to approach it.
Any other? Councillor Hodge.
Yes, it's just about thinking about the policy and very special circumstances. So the very special, and the planning balance, the very special circumstances argument relates to giving some weight to the fallback position in relation to the non-compliance with aspects of Greenbelt policy. But where does the planning balance argument take in all the other policies that this is not compliant with, in terms of the town and country planning order, the sustainable location, the outside the planning boundary, and the RE4 to do with the reuse of the agricultural dwelling for agricultural workers. So we're giving weight to planning decisions being made based on the very special circumstances aspect of it, but not the other planning policies. I don't know whether that's for the discussion or for now.
Yeah, so we, in the balancing conclusion, we've noted all of the relevant policies. So it's not just the conflict with the Greenbelt. We've noted conflict that it's outside of the housing development boundary, and that it's remote. So against kind of the highways policies normally. So that's all there. That's all formed part of the balance. So yeah, that has been considered, and that's all here.
And just to very briefly add, when looking at very special circumstances, you consider the harm to the Greenbelt plus any other harm. So that, and I think this has been picked up in the update report. So it's a similar judgment, really. You're weighing the other material considerations, the very special circumstances, against all of the harm identified in the case.
Right, I think let's move to the debate. and at some point we need a motion proposed. So who would like to start? Councillor Warren.
Thanks. I feel this is a bit of the Timmy show today, but I know this very well, this area, actually. I'm going to give you a guided tour now, Councillor Jackson. It's not far from me. It's about probably half a mile from Pensford, where they have a primary school, so I can answer that one for you. This is a lane, it's kind of been spoken about like it's a lane with nothing on it. There are a number of farms on this lane, and there are actually a number of houses on this lane, so although it will not be an isolated house. I'm actually delighted to see this application coming forward. I think it's a really good one. And I think it's much better than what was there with the Q class. Again, I take the thing, we are where we are, so something's going to be built there. So you can either build a barn or a converted barn where you actually come straight off the road and almost drive into it, or you can set it back probably about 20 metres, probably no more, 30 metres maybe. So it's the same block, but actually in a much better position. As you're driving up the lane, you've got a gate there, and you've got the barn just here, but now you've got the gate in the same place, and the new house will be set back. So I think today our option is we go with what we already have, which is the Q class, which is converting a barn, which I say it is what it is. It's not a great barn to convert, it's not like a nice stone barn. Or you can build a nice house. You can build a nice family house, which I approve of. I live in the country, and I think you need more building in the country personally, because you've got the local schools will die, the local shops will close, they become retirement homes because only the elder people can afford to live there. So the fact you can get some younger people with a family come in, I really do support. I was one of those younger families a long time ago who bought a house in the country, nearly bankrupted me buying it, but it is what it is. So I actually support this recommendation. The only objections, I think there was one from highways, which I think that's neither here nor there, because you're going to get those cars in and out, whether you have what you have now or whatever you have. The other one was brought together from the local council because of the parish council objecting. It's a shame, if they are that strong wanted to object, it's a shame there's nobody here today to speak about it, so we don't really know how much the objection is, how strong they feel about it. So I very much support this. You're building a house which will be much more environmentally friendly. You can build it out of stone, which will then match with the other houses that are along there. So I can't support this strongly enough, so I'd like to move the officer's recommendation to permit.
Okay, just before I come to Councillor Jackson, do I have a seconder for that motion? I saw Councillor Crossley first, so do you want to say a few words?
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, my council iPad is a bit gooey and is in need of repair, so I can't get back to my previous notes of when we discussed this before, so I can't remember what I said before, but I'm looking at what we've got now, and the issue is which is the preferable scheme. We had the debate about all the issues about location and green belt and all this and that policies last time, and whatever that debate was, the conclusion was that we permitted it. So as far as I can see, the fact that this is just a few yards in a different location is not relevant to revisiting those arguments. And so therefore the question is exactly as Chris says, what is the preferable scheme? And to me, I'm very clear that what we've got here is a much better application than the one that this committee previously considered and after debate approved. And so therefore I think we've got a gain here for
So just to say that you referred to the previous application. I think you're talking about the last meeting, Elm Farm, and we actually we went against the officer recommendation and we refused it. So I just want to avoid any confusion. This is the first time this application has come forward, but I don't want to interfere with your remarks, but just to correct that.
All right, so it was an officer's decision before then. Yeah, sorry about that. As I said, my iPad is gooed up. So it was an officer's decision before, and it's now come back, and I think this is a immensely improved scheme on all points. And so the debate doesn't need to be revisited that the officers had about the location and the Greenbelt policies and all that. The only thing that I would like to make sure is really strongly in the officer's thought is that when the building is built, that actually the barn is demolished and as part of that process. So I know Chris said that it is in the report, but to me that is really important that at an early stage the barn is demolished so that we don't have any chance of a revisit to say, oh, well, actually we've got a barn here, what about turning it into another condo? So that needs to be much stronger, however strongly it's written in. And the only other question I personally think we should be considering on this application, because it is controversial, it is in the Greenbelt, it is etc., is whether this is a final application, and I think we need a little bit of debate whether we remove permitted development rights for any future changes should we agree to it. So I'm not putting that into the motion at the moment, but I think that's something that we as a committee should consider before we reach a vote.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Crossley. We'll take that as being seconding the motion. So we're now debating the motion that we accept the officer recommendation to permit. So, Councillor Jackson.
If we are going to vote for this motion, and I am not, there would need to be a condition addressing the parish council's objections. I'm afraid the fact that they're normal working people probably and can't manage to get here on a Wednesday morning shouldn't be held against their arguments with regard to a planning application. They say there's a lack of information on sustainable construction as required by the neighbourhood plan. Now, I think neighbourhood plans are very important, and I'm sure that the Parish Council is right to say there should be a sustainable method of construction. So I would expect to see a condition in the conditions here. And my memory is not much better than Councillor Crossley's iPad, I'm afraid. I did read the conditions, but I would like to underline the importance of that one. They also are unhappy about it being outside the housing development boundary, but of course, and the increased height of the building, and I don't like the increased height. I have ringing in my ears the dulcet tones of Lisa Bartlett, if other members remember, that she would always say that development out in the Greenbelt is unacceptable, and this is not in any stretch of the imagination policy compliant. If we refuse it, they have still got their fallback, somewhere to live. It's not that we're sort of making a young couple homeless, but of course the other thing is they may have to go and look after elderly parents in some other part of the country. So, you know, the occupancy is not a relevant consideration in my view.
Right, can I just go to the planning officer? And I guess you want to reply about the sustainable construction.
Yeah, only just to confirm that, yeah, so that was missing at the start of the application, but then it was received in the end and reviewed, and it's policy compliant. And on top of that, I believe there's a condition on the recommended approval in relation to kind of compliance with those sustainability measures. So yeah, it was missing at the start, but it was later kind of submitted. So,
thank you, Councillor Simon.
I'll speak briefly just to say I agree with Councillor Warren. I think I've cycled up that lane, very pretty little lane, and I give some weight to the fact that this is a self-build. I think we should be encouraging self-build properties.
Councillor Halsall, and then Councillor Hughes, and then, oh, Councillor Hodge. Halsall, Hodge. Right.
Thank you. The location is in the Greenbelt, it's outside the settlement boundary, it's totally unsustainable, it's nowhere near the nearest village, but a dwelling has been approved there, so there is a precedent for a development, of residential development of the scale that has been approved under prior approval. We are where we are with the Durham Permitted Development Order. It came in about 7-8 years ago now. I think the original concept behind it was to make use of redundant buildings in rural areas to provide housing. There has been case law that determines the style of barn that is deemed suitable for conversion. I think the premise behind the original relaxation of the rules was it would have been a more robust stone barn rather than sort of a cattle shed. But obviously it's been deemed through the prior approval process that the steel frame structure, you know, maybe even have asbestos on there or something, is suitable for conversion. There will obviously be new materials introduced. But as an approved building, it is quite hideous. And no, I'm not going to sort of use it as relevance, but we did discuss the Elm Farm proposal last month, and that was refused or overturned. But it was primarily overturned on the basis that the design was felt to be unacceptable, whereas the proposed building, it's not pastiche, it's not sort of a footballer's wife's mansion. It does have the characteristics of a barn house. If we are to approve it, have the control through the conditions to ensure that it's going to deliver ecological enhancements. It will be sustainable in construction, and it will use sensitive materials. On the basis that the barn will be demolished, I am happy to support this scheme, despite the fact that ordinarily we would not tolerate it, but we are where we are.
Councillor Hodge.
So I'm still, there's one issue with the increased height is quite a big thing for me, the 2.5 metres, and I would feel more comfortable in my decision if I knew the area and had seen the site. I don't get a sense that people want a site visit, but I would find it easier to come to a decision if 2.5 metres is a lot, you know, it's a floor, and I think it would have been helpful actually to have more views. I didn't ask further questions because there are clearly not more views, but if we'd had them, been easier to come to a decision, so I'm still thinking about it.
Right, Councillor Warren.
I was just going to sum up, actually. I think Councillor Hughes is probably before me. I was just going to sum up, if you like, if you want to come first.
Thank you. So we've had quite a few applications recently outside of the boundary, the housing development boundary. We had 5 dwellings at Hinton Blewett, which was very similar in terms it was a barn conversion that then wasn't a barn conversion, which we chose to refuse. Before that, we then had a PIP application for a house that we permitted because the planning inspector had already permitted 3 houses close by, also outside the housing boundary. So there is a lot of inconsistency in this process of small developments outside of the housing boundary. My concern with that is always that we have a process, whether it was the LPPU or the current full updates of the local plan, which enables communities to participate in a decision about where housing is developed within their own communities. And these applications bypass that process of allowing the community to have a say in where housing is developed within their communities. That said, on this one, it's difficult. I mean, are there exceptional circumstances? Probably not. The scheme itself is obviously a much better scheme than the barn conversion itself. So on balance, it's probably the right thing to support it. But I think it's a close run thing.
Really?
Coming from a rural area, I can understand why some villages haven't increased their housing development boundary because they don't want it to be swamped by large developments. This is different. This is a small, single house. I mean, I can understand why actually if it had remained on the footprint of the existing barn, then there probably wouldn't be a problem. I can understand that the need for more ecology and better environmental standards, but you could do that anyway. You could put solar panels on the existing barn, or not on the existing barn, the converted barn. So there are, I do understand where the parish council's coming from, but I think that if this is just a single development, then it's probably fine. But I would understand if they'd moved the housing boundary and then ended up being swamped.
Councillor Crossley, you wanted to come in.
I just wanted to ask Tim about my point about permitted development rights going forward in the future and whether that was something we should add to the recommendation. That was all.
Just on that point, I think it'd be quite fair to restrict permitted development on extensions. However, I wouldn't want to restrict in the future for applying for a garage or maybe a garden house or something like that. So if we could do that on extensions to the house, is that possible?
So it's a similar position to as before. Is obviously you can add any conditions you deem fit, but the MPPF does say that you shouldn't restrict national permitted development rights unless there's clear justification for doing so. So I'm always slightly nervous unless there is a clear justification for doing so. Yeah. As if we haven't given a justification, we have lost costs on appeal on that very point before. So if you are able to give some justification for why extensions should be restricted, then that would be an option open to you.
I don't think I can meet that legal threshold, but the applicant has heard my concerns.
In that case, then, I think I'm happy to proceed with the motion as is.
Right. Councillor Halsall, and then we'll go to a vote.
Okay. Just on the point of permitted development, the barn conversion, if that was to become a dwelling, am I right in saying that there will be no PD rights to build within the curtilage, or by virtue of the plot becoming residential, do they get all their entitlements? I'll just leave it at that question for now.
Chris might want to jump in, but I think with the current fallback, so say the barn becomes house just through the conversion, I believe they would have PD rights because Sorry? I believe it would, yeah. But Chris, correct me if I'm wrong.
It's a bit difficult to know the answer to that off the top of my head because, as has been mentioned before, the permitted development rights order is a sort of labyrinth of various things.
Could I ask a secondary question?
I believe that what the officer said is correct.
But because it's in Greenbelt, there's going to be restrictions anyway in terms of scale and positioning of various PD buildings.
And in a sense, this is academic because the motion isn't talking about removing development rights. So I'm going to go to the vote. So all those in favour of accepting the officer recommendation to permit, please show. Any abstentions? Now there are 10 people here, so that slightly worries me. I have. I just have. You didn't hear me. So you're against. Right, that's fine. We're up to 10 now. Right, so that passed by 9 votes to 1. Thank you, everybody, for that. But we've got one final one, which is the tree. So Councillor Hodge is going to withdraw. Anybody associated with the previous application, welcome to go now. Thank you for your time. And we move to the next and final planning application.
Thank you, Chair. This item relates to a tree in a Bath conservation area The only reason why it's come to committee today is because it relates to a councillor's tree. It relates to a dead tree, but it's been presented as a 6 weeks notice, but technically a dead tree does not require 6 weeks notice. It's come in as is presented because to make sure that there's transparency in how it's dealt with. So this is just a location map and aerial view of the area. That's Park Gardens in Weston. As you can see, there's plenty of trees around, and that's the location of the tree as presented to us within the 6 weeks notice. It looks green from this one, but this is a very dated one. It's very dead, I'm afraid. All brown foliage has been retained. In terms of the reasoning behind it, it seems to be the only one that's been affected. We suspect honey fungus, but we don't know for certain. Clearly, the officer recommendation is to raise no objection to the removal of this tree. Thank you.
We've got no public speakers. Any questions to the case officer? There are no questions. Thank you. So we move to the debate and perhaps an early motion. Councillor Warren.
I might as well do the full house today, haven't I?
Yeah, hat-trick.
I love that tree. No, I just move that we accept the officer's recommendation.
Seconder, Councillor Jackson. Right, anybody want to speak? Councillor Halsall.
Just a question, did the councillor offer to plant another tree on its site once it's been felled?
Yes, I was very keen to. Clearly, it's not appropriate to put it in the same place, especially since there's other trees around. So we'll be looking at an alternative location within the garden that would accommodate a suitable replacement.
Okay, we move to the vote. All those in favour of the officer's recommendation to permit? That's unanimous. That's 9. No, we're 8. Toby left 8. Thank you. So that's passed. If we could just invite Councillor Hodge to return, if somebody could ask her to come in. And so that's decisions made. We move now to appeals report. I just wait for Councillor Hodge to resume her seat. You've probably heard the result. Yes. Okay. Okay, we've moved on to the appeals report. Any questions or comments on the appeals report? Councillor Jackson.
Yes, I have to declare an interest on 22/03744/full, the Bath Road car wash it's actually in Radstock, but Westfield has an interest because it's very local for employment. And, to declare the interest, the applicant, Matthew Bissocks, is a neighbour and a friend, and he's kept me fully informed of the progress of this application from the start and asked me to read the inspector's report, which I did. I believe that there will be a fresh submission of a modified application. But what concerns me really is we have here a very tatty car wash, an ancient garage, and I had thought that it was reasonable to allow the application because it would improve the conservation area. But the officer took the view that if the business was reconstructed, the view of Clandown would be restricted. And Clandowners are falling around with laughter about this one. But there is actually quite an important principle that it was right to highlight. What do you do when a building is going to obstruct a view of a green space? So, yes, there was a point, and the modifications will try to address that issue. But I do regret it because it's jobs, and where previously it was staffed by Romanians and Albanians, it's now staffed by local people who don't like the working conditions.
Right, we've been asked to note the report, so is there... thank you for the comment. Right, all those in favour of noting the report? Thank you. Yeah. Right, we're almost there. Date of next meeting. Next meeting is on Wednesday, the 17th of January. At this stage, I'm not aware of any site visits, so I formally close the meeting and happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas, everyone.